We have a presentation of LULAC history. The assistant curator for the Iowa Women Archives from Iowa City is here, and she'd like to give a short presentation. So if you will focus your attention to the screen here, and we'll be back in a little while. Thank you.
And can you all hear me? Okay. I'm truly honored to be invited here to talk about the incredible history of LULAC Council 10. 4 years ago, the Iowa Women's Archives at the University of Iowa Library started a project to preserve the family and community history of Iowa Latinas. Many have worked on the Mujeres Latinas project. Iskra Nunez, Rachel Carrion, Regina Buendia Cruz, Teresa Garcia, and Karen Mason. She's the curator of the Iowa Women's Archives, and she's here today. Since 2005, approximately 135 oral history interviews have been conducted with Iowa Latinas and Latinos across Iowa. Recently, the University of Iowa Library provided funding to hire some very capable bilingual students to begin to transcribe these interviews. I'm happy to say they're here today, and they're looking forward to dancing. Their names are Melissa, Hannah, Janet, and recent UI graduate Umbar. Stand up. They're rapidly becoming experts themselves in Iowa Latino history, and I hope you'll have a chance to talk with them. Maybe they've transcribed your interview or the interview of someone you know. But mostly, I want to say thank you to everyone who has taken part in the Mujeres Latinas project. You have opened your doors to us, shared your life stories, and donated documents and materials to the Iowa Women's Archives. Thank you for taking time to answer our questions with great patience, deep wisdom, and incredible insight. When we first started this project, Iowa Latino history was like a giant puzzle, and now as the pieces begin to fall into place, a clear picture is emerging. Just last week, I visited a 6th grade dual language class in West Liberty. Students there are engaged in an in-depth study of Cesar Chavez and the farm worker struggle for justice. And I know this is a subject near and dear to the hearts of many of you. These students are learning about events in California during the 1960s, and their teacher asked if I would come in and talk with them about how Mexican Americans in Iowa supported the Great Boycott. And so your history became their history too. Undergraduate and graduate students at the University of Iowa are also engaging in the study of our state's Latino history. And I just want to take a moment to introduce you to the Assistant Professor of History at the University of Iowa, Omar Valerio Jimenez. He's here also today. On this wonderful occasion of the 50th anniversary of LULAC Council 10, it is appropriate that we take a few moments to look back and reflect on the people and events that have shaped its history. I promised Rita I would limit my remarks to 20 minutes, and so I decided just to focus on the early years of Council 10, the period from 1959, whoops, it's moving, isn't it? Oh well, to 1969. And when I think of that history, the first name that comes to my mind is that of Mary Terrones. Like many who grew up in the barrios of the Quad Cities, the seeds of her activism were sown early. Mary had lived at Cook's Point since 1923 when she was 5 years old. As you all know, Mary Terrones was by nature feisty and outspoken, even as a little girl. And the ability to communicate easily with a wide range of people came naturally to Mary. When the Cook's Point barrio was closed down in 1952, it really wasn't surprising that Mary Terrones would step forward to play a key role in helping barrio residents find affordable housing. A difficult task indeed, because during those days, there was a lot of discrimination in Davenport. And it was during this time that Mary Toronis first met an 18-year-old St. Ambrose College student who would later become a priest and strong proponent of civil rights in Davenport. That student was Marvin Moddett, and he's here today. With the closing of Cook's Point came the realization that the struggle for equal citizenship could best be served through the effective use of coalitions and organizations. As Henry Vargas explained, we saw what the NAACP could do, and we struggled to find an organization, a national organization, that would represent us. The League of United Latin American Citizens would be that organization. LULAC Council 10, as has been already said, was chartered on February 16, 1959. In the years that followed, its members gained experience that would prove invaluable in promoting the rights of Mexican Americans locally and throughout the state. Mary Toronis' son, John, would later explain, LULAC taught me how to be part of the community and how to run an organization. It's important to remember that the passage of civil rights legislation we all take for granted today did not occur in a vacuum. It grew out of a long groundswell of grassroots activism in communities across the country, including Davenport. And this process took place over many, many years. Nothing was given, everything was fought for. In the years before and after the passage of the 1964 Civil Rights Act, LULAC Council 10 leaders pushed for equal opportunities in housing, education, and employment. In this, they worked with progressive priests like Father Bill O'Connor and Father Marvin Moddett. Simply put, we cannot understand the history of LULAC Council 10 without placing it within the context of grassroots community activism. Oops. In 1962, Henry Vargas served on the executive board of the Davenport Catholic Interracial Council. The Davenport CIC is an example of an organization that promoted grassroots community action. In fact, it was, I think I'm right in saying, the largest civil rights organization in Iowa at that time. Through it, Father Moddett worked relentlessly, usually behind the scenes, to promote racial justice. According to one CIC member, Moddett was the machine that made the Catholic Interracial Council go. The Davenport CIC established the Pachamenteras Peace and Freedom Award in 1964 in the wake of the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. Recipients of the award included Martin Luther King Jr., who came to Davenport in 1965 to receive the award. In 1992, the year before his death, Cesar Chavez came to Davenport to receive the prestigious award. And in 1969, at the height of the great boycott activism in Davenport, Saul Alinsky, the hard-hitting community organizer from Chicago, received the Pacem in Terris Award. Speaking at the banquet in Davenport that year, Alinsky urged the audience to gain control over their lives by organizing. He asked, why organize? To get power. What is power? The ability to act. Reconciliation, Alinsky concluded, is when you get the power and the other side gets reconciled to it. And it was at that 1969 Pacem in Terris Awards banquet in Davenport that Alvino Pena, a charter member of LULAC Council 10, was honored for his work with inner city youth. There we go. The previous year, in 1968, Coach Pena opened the Davenport Boxing Club. There he trained inner city kids, And it was because of Albino Pena that these kids were able to have opportunities that they never otherwise could have had. After the tragic death of his own son, Pena made good on a promise he made to himself that he would devote the rest of his life to improving the lives of others, and he did just that. Albino Pena epitomized the spirit of self-determination prevalent among the founding members of LULAC Council 10. Is Albino Pena here?
Yes.
Charged the Davenport City Council with discrimination in its decision to irrevocably suspend the license of the only Mexican-owned tavern in Davenport. The group that went before the City Council at that time included Jesse Vargas, his brother, Henry, and Ernest Rodriguez. All of these young men were leaders in the Scott County Young Democrats. In fact, Jesse was president of that organization. And I might add that Jesse Vargas was also president of the local union where he worked, UAW Local 377, and that was Riverside Foundry, known today as Sevier Steel. And Jesse Vargas actually played a key role in organizing the union at Riverside Foundry, where many Mexicans worked. And he was very much respected in the labor movement in the area. But going before the City Council in 1959, it was Jesse that argued that the council's decision to close the tavern was too severe and that the police investigation had been discriminatory. Jesse concluded, "This seems to be a case of whites versus Mexicans rather than one American citizen against another." Henry Vargas, another of Council 10's charter members, was a union member and laborer at John Deere Plow. Henry served on Davenport's first Human Relations Commission in 1962. As he remembered, back then, getting people to file a complaint with the commission was like pulling teeth. While many Mexicans experienced discrimination in housing and employment, they remained silent. Henry again was serving on the Human Relations Commission in 1968. This was the year that the Davenport Catholic Interracial Council presented the Davenport City Council with its third request in 5 years for a fair housing ordinance. And Davenport civil rights groups, the CIC, the Catholic Interracial Council, the NAACP, and LULAC took a united stand on that ordinance. Another founding member of LULAC Council 10 was Ernest Rodriguez. A union member and packing house worker at Oscar Mayer. Ernest Rodriguez served on the Davenport Human Relations Commission between 1968 and 1970, and it was during those years that he took up the proposal for a paid full-time director to the commission. I might mention many things. I might mention the Minority Coalition, Mingo. I might mention the Area Board for Migrants. But if I go through the many, many things that Ernest Rodriguez and others did, we would never be able to get to the dancing part of the evening. But please know I'm leaving a lot out here. On the issue of equality in education, Rodriguez brought his concerns directly to the Davenport School Board. He challenged the board to ask teachers to lift the veil of whatever obscures your vision. Look into our hearts, look into our minds, read about us, know us, understand us. The importance of education was always foremost in the minds of the members of LULAC Council 10. In fact, founding member Jesse Ramirez was the one to first get the council to take part in LULAC's National Scholarship Program. But remember, it was the role of LULAC women that was so critical to the success of the many, many fundraising drives that supported the scholarship program. As the preeminent women's historian Gerda Lerner reminds us, women really do make up half of the population of the entire world. So of course it follows that women probably also make up half of the membership of LULAC Council 10. And no doubt they did at least half of the work of the council, though that work was often behind the scenes. In 1961, Council 10 circulated this newsletter announcing a chili supper, and all of the proceeds, of course, would go to the scholarship fund. And it said, "Attention, all women donating chili. Here's the recipe you're to follow so that all the chili will be uniform." Now, I don't have the figures for the 1960s, but in later years, Council 10 members raised anywhere from $5,000 to $27,000 each year, which the National LULAC matched dollar for dollar. And as Salvador Lopez, another of the founding members of LULAC Council 10, explained to me, their peak year came when they raised $27,000, and the National had to match that dollar for dollar. This, by the way, led to a revision of National LULAC policy. The National LULAC, instead of matching dollar for dollar, reduced it to 60 cents on the dollar after that. But I think it's fair to ask here, how much chili, how many raffle tickets, how many phone calls, how many letters, and how many woman hours are represented in those figures? Now, it goes without saying that the Iowa Women's Archives would like many more documents about the role of women in Iowa LULACs. So please do feel free to call the archives, contact Ernie Rodriguez or Henry Vargas. They all know how to get a hold of us if you have materials that you would like to put in the collection. Concurrent with the formative years of LULAC Council 10 was the eruption of the California grape strike in 1965, led by Cesar Chavez. As the farm worker movement for justice gained momentum nationally, a strong Mexican-American leadership in Davenport was ready to play a significant role. John Terrones, a former president of LULAC Council 10 and the son of Mary Terrones, had emerged as an effective voice for Mexican-Americans throughout Iowa. Elected as state director of Iowa LULAC in 1968, Terrones rallied Iowa LULAC members to mobilize for change. He spoke openly of ethnic and racial discrimination, forcing a public dialogue on previously ignored concerns. His vision for Iowa LULAC embodied the civil rights aspirations of the national organization, as he stressed the need for working LULACs rather than social organizations. Terrones' leadership skills were recognized in 1970 when he was recruited to work as a mediator in the Community Relations Service of the U.S. Justice Department, a position he would hold until his death in 1997. Known as a man of peace and justice, he was responsible for assuring a peaceful cross-country march of Native Americans during the longest walk in 1978, and he was instrumental in helping the Justice Department establish a working relationship with Cesar Chavez. The importance of Cesar Chavez and the farm worker movement for justice that he led is known by many of us, but it may be hard for us to really grasp today just how significant the Great Boycott movement was. This was the first consumer boycott that would spread beyond the labor movement to reach a broad middle-class audience and educate them about the deplorable conditions under which their food was produced. It was a movement of truly enormous magnitude, and because it was so big, what happened in Iowa in the years after 1965 has to be seen within the context of that movement. The Davenport LULAC Council had nearly 10 years' experience under its belt when it organized the Quad City Great Boycott Committee in 1968. In the young and outspoken John Terrones, the committee had its own charismatic leader who in many ways embodied the spirit of Cesar Chavez and the emerging Chicano movement. As one LULAC member explained, John was real persuasive. He had a lot of moxie. He was smart and aggressive and really could think on his feet. The Great Boycott campaign in Davenport drew support from the usual coalition of activists, church groups, labor unions, and of course LULAC members, Phyllis Fillers, Henry Vargas, Ernest Rodriguez, Aurora Hernandez, Lola Garcia, Mercy Aguilera, and many others picketed supermarkets to support the rights of grape pickers in Delano, California. Children like Rita Vargas and Mike Toronas also stood picket duty in Davenport. The high profile of the Delano grape strike enabled Davenport Mexican Americans and others to draw attention to the terrible conditions faced by migrant workers in Iowa's own agricultural industry. The extensive use of migrant labor was a long-standing tradition on many farms, especially around Muscatine, where H.J. Heinz had a large canning factory. Each year, around 1,000 Tejanos came to work in the tomato fields around Muscatine. And so it was that the Great Boycott Committee of the Quad Cities took up the cause of Iowa migrant workers. When LULAC movement, the Davenport LULAC Council had nearly 10 years experience under its belt when it organized the Quad City Great Boycott Committee in 1968. In the young and outspoken John Toronas, the committee had its own charismatic leader who in many ways embodied the spirit of Cesar Chavez and the emerging Chicano movement. As one LULAC member explained, John was real persuasive. He had a lot of moxie. He was smart and aggressive and really could think on his feet. The Great Boycott campaign in Davenport drew support from the usual coalition of activists, church groups, labor unions, and of course LULAC members, Phyllis Fillers, Henry Vargas, Ernest Rodriguez, Aurora Hernandez, Lola Garcia, Mercy Aguilera, and many others picketed supermarkets to support the rights of grape pickers in Delano, California. Children like Rita Vargas and Mike Toronas also stood picket duty in Davenport. The high profile of the Delano grape strike enabled Davenport Mexican Americans and others to draw attention to the terrible conditions faced by migrant workers in Iowa's own agricultural industry. The extensive use of migrant labor was a long-standing tradition on many farms, especially around Muscatine, where H.J. Heinz had a large canning factory. Each year, around 1,000 Tejanos came to work in the tomato fields around Muscatine. And so it was that the Great Boycott Committee of the Quad Cities took up the cause of Iowa migrant workers. When LULAC members visited Muscatine, issues of California grape pickers fused with issues of Iowa migrant workers. The conditions they saw in Iowa migrant camps reminded them of the inequities they had faced growing up in the barrios of the Quad Cities. As Henry Vargas explained, some of us had lived at Cook's Point, and so we thought it wasn't right. So we thought it was something we had to do. No water, no electricity, and we had to get out there and work to make money, and we knew it wasn't right. And we saw some of the housing in Muscatine, and we went down there, and the farmers were up in arms over it. What those people had to go through down there. LULAC Council 10 members were among those who marched on Des Moines in 1969 in support of two fiercely contested migrant worker bills pending in the Iowa legislature. They worked with settled-out migrant workers in Muscatine to start a boycott of Heinz Company products. Working with organized labor, church groups, and Iowa House Representative John Tapscott, they planned for the start of a tomato boycott. Almost exactly 40 years ago from today, on Easter Sunday, 1969, Council 10 members were among those who distributed 100,000 leaflets supporting the rights of migrant workers in Iowa at church services throughout Davenport, Des Moines, and Mason City. These leaflets called for Iowans to act with Christian charity and support the migrant worker bills pending in the Iowa legislature. Many of you will recognize this sign. It stands outside the LULAC Hall in Davenport here. It says Cesar Chavez Drive. A few will remember the words, Si se puede, the rallying cry of the farm worker movement for justice led by Cesar Chavez. And how well we all know the words, Yes we can, adopted from the farm worker movement for justice by the Obama presidential campaign. The passage of Iowa's first migrant worker legislation, the recognition of the United Farm Workers as the bargaining agent for grape pickers in California, the ability of this country to elect its first African-American president in 2008. These gains were not handed down. They did not occur in a vacuum. They were preceded by years of grassroots community activism, even in Iowa, in communities like Davenport. Nothing was given. Everything was fought for. And the members of LULAC Council 10 were important contributors to this history. That's Ernie Rodriguez. Happy birthday, LULAC.
On your table, you should have an application for LULAC. If you're not a member, by all means, please consider joining. With us this evening is the first queen elected by LULAC in 1959. And please.